The stars burned cold in the endless dark of space. Admiral Zextar stood on the bridge of his massive warship, the Dominator. His 6 eyes watched the main screen as another world fell to his empire. The planet below had once been home to billions of beings. Now it belonged to the Vorthak Empire. "Another easy victory, Admiral," said his second-in-command, Commander Vexilon. "They surrendered in less than 3 hours, the fastest yet." Zextar nodded slowly. His gray skin showed no emotion, but inside he felt the familiar satisfaction of conquest. For 300 years, the Vorthak Empire had swept across the galaxy like a storm. Every world they found, they conquered. Every species they met, they defeated. Not once had they faced real resistance. The secret was fear. The Vorthak had learned long ago that the threat of destruction was more powerful than destruction itself. They would arrive at a world with their massive fleet. Their ships were enormous, each one the size of a city. Their weapons could crack planets in half, but they rarely had to use them. Instead, they would send a message to the world below. The message was always the same. "Surrender now or face total destruction. You have 1 hour to decide." Then they would wait. They would show their power by destroying a moon or an asteroid. They would broadcast images of other worlds that had refused to surrender, worlds that were now nothing but space dust. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories. The Vorthak Empire was unstoppable. Fighting them was suicide. Surrender was the only choice that made sense. "How many worlds have we conquered now?" Zextar asked. 2047, Admiral, Vexilon replied. "And we have never lost a single battle. Never lost a battle." The words filled Zextar with pride. His empire was perfect. His military was perfect. His strategy was perfect. Why fight when you could simply threaten? Why destroy when you could control? The Vorthak way was efficient and clean. On the screen, the conquered world spun slowly. Cities that had stood for thousands of years now flew Vorthak flags. Beings who had been free yesterday were now slaves of the Empire. In a few days, Vorthak governors would arrive to run the planet. The local population would work in the mines and factories. Their children would learn Vorthak history and speak Vorthak words. "Sir, we have new orders from the High Command," said Lieutenant Kexmore from the communications station. "Show me," Zextar ordered. The main screen changed to show a star map. A red line traced a path through space to a small yellow star near the edge of known space. The star was circled in green, marking it as their next target. The Sol system, Vexilon read from his tablet. "Third planet from the star. Species name, humans. Population, 8 billion. Technology level, early space flight. Military assessment, minimal threat." Zextar studied the information. Humans were a young species, barely able to travel between planets. Their largest ships were tiny compared to Vorthak vessels. Their weapons were primitive. According to the intelligence report, they had only recently made contact with other alien species. "Estimated conquest time?" Zextar asked. 6 hours, Admiral. Possibly less. They have no unified world government. Multiple nations still fight among themselves. Classic primitive behavior. The Admiral allowed himself a small smile. Divided species were always the easiest to conquer. When a planet had many different governments, they could never agree on how to respond to the Vorthak threat. Some would want to fight. Others would want to surrender. While they argued among themselves, the Vorthak would simply take control. "Set course for the Sol system," Zextar commanded. "Standard approach. We will arrive in 72 hours. The massive Vorthak fleet began to move. 50 ships of various sizes, all painted in the dark red and black colors of the Empire. At the center was the Dominator, a ship so large it had its own gravity. Around it flew the heavy cruisers, bristling with weapons that could melt continents. Smaller ships darted between the larger ones like fish around whales. As they traveled through hyperspace, Zextar reviewed the intelligence files on humanity. The species was carbon-based, like many others they had conquered. They breathed oxygen and water. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head. Very ordinary. What was less ordinary was their behavior. The report mentioned that humans were unusually violent for their technology level. They fought constant wars among themselves, even though they all belonged to the same species. They had weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, yet they had not used them to conquer each other completely. "Strange," Zextar muttered as he read. Most species became peaceful as they developed better weapons. They realized that fighting would destroy them all. But humans seemed to think differently. They made bigger weapons and kept fighting anyway. "What was that, Admiral?" Vexilon asked. "These humans," Zextar said. "They fight each other constantly. Wars over resources, territory, ideas, even wars over which invisible gods they worship." "Primitive thinking," Vexilon agreed. "They will learn the peace of empire soon enough." The report also mentioned human history. They had fought thousands of wars over their short existence. Wars with swords and horses, wars with guns and cannons, wars with flying machines and tanks, wars with nuclear weapons that could burn cities in seconds. Through it all, they had survived and grown stronger, but that meant nothing against the Vorthak Empire. Many species had been warlike before they surrendered. The Korthek had been fierce warriors until they saw a Vorthak dreadnought crack their moon in half. The Zeltans had fought bravely until the Empire destroyed their entire space fleet in minutes. Fear was stronger than courage. Logic was stronger than bravery. "Admiral, we are approaching the Sol system," the navigation officer announced. "Dropping out of hyperspace in 10 minutes. Zextar stood and smoothed his uniform. Another conquest was about to begin. Soon, Earth would join the long list of worlds that belonged to the Vorthak Empire. The humans would surrender, just like all the others. They would accept their new rulers and learn to live in peace under Vorthak control. It would be quick and clean. No unnecessary destruction, no pointless fighting, just another victory in the endless expansion of the Empire. "Prepare the standard surrender message," Zextar ordered, "and ready the demonstration weapons. We may need to destroy something to show our power." The crew moved to obey. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. In a few hours, humanity would kneel before the Vorthak Empire, just like every other species in the galaxy. Admiral Zextar had no way of knowing that he was about to meet the first species that would refuse to kneel. Admiral Zextar stared at the communication display in complete confusion. In 300 years of conquest, he had never received a response like this. The human captain had simply said no to their surrender demand. No negotiation, no conditions. No attempt to buy time, just a flat refusal. "I don't understand," Commander Vexilon said. "Are they malfunctioning? Is their translation system broken? Run the message through analysis again," Zextar ordered. The ship's computer processed the human transmission for the third time. The result was the same. The humans had understood the surrender demand perfectly. They had understood the consequences of refusal. And they had chosen to fight anyway. "Admiral," the communications officer said, "the human ship is changing course. They're heading directly toward us." Zextar felt something he had never experienced before in battle: genuine surprise. "They're attacking? One ship against 50? It appears so, sir. Their weapons are charging and they're accelerating to attack speed." On the Defiance, Captain Morrison stood behind the tactical station where Lisa Brown was preparing their weapons. The main screen showed the massive alien fleet getting closer. Each enemy ship was many times larger than their own vessel. "Weapons. Status?" Jake asked. "All systems online," Lisa replied. "We have 12 torpedo tubes and 6 energy cannons. Not much against a fleet that size, but we'll make them count." Chief Engineer Tony Walsh's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, I'm giving you everything the engines have got. But I should warn you, if we take any serious damage, we might lose life support." "Understood, Tony. Just keep us flying as long as you can." Navigator Pete Davis looked up from his station. "Captain, I'm plotting an attack run on their flagship. It's the biggest ship in the center of their formation." Jake nodded. "If we're going to do this, we might as well aim high." On the Vorthak flagship, Admiral Zextar was trying to understand what he was seeing. His tactical officers were running constant scans of the human ship. The results made no sense. "Their vessel is severely outgunned," the tactical officer reported. "Our smallest cruiser has more firepower than their entire ship. They cannot possibly hope to win this battle." "Then why are they attacking?" Zextar demanded. Nobody had an answer. In the Empire's entire history, no species had ever chosen to fight when victory was impossible. Fear and logic always won over courage and honor. It was a universal truth, proven on thousands of worlds. "Perhaps they don't understand our power?" Vexilon suggested. "Shall we demonstrate?" Zextar considered this. The standard procedure was to destroy something impressive to show their capabilities, usually a moon or a large asteroid, something that would make the enemy realize resistance was futile. "Target that asteroid field to our left," Zextar ordered. "Use the primary beam cannon. Show them what happens to those who oppose the Empire." The Dominator's main weapon charged with a sound like thunder. Energy gathered in the massive cannon until it glowed white-hot. Then it fired. A beam of pure destruction lanced out and struck the largest asteroid in the nearby field. The space rock, bigger than most cities, simply vanished, turned to dust in an instant. "Transmit the display to the human ship," Zextar ordered. "Surely, now, they will see reason." On the Defiance, the crew watched the alien demonstration in silence. The power they had just witnessed was beyond anything in human technology. One shot from that weapon could destroy their ship 100 times over. "Well," Jake said calmly, "at least we know what we're up against." "Captain," Amy said from communications, "they're transmitting again. Same surrender demand. They're giving us another chance to give up." Jake walked to his captain's chair and sat down. He could feel his crew watching him. They were waiting for his decision. The smart choice was obvious. Surrender and hope the aliens were merciful. Live to fight another day. Preserve the ship and crew for some future battle when the odds might be better. But Jake Morrison had not joined the Space Service to make smart choices when his people were threatened. "Amy, open a channel to the alien fleet." "Channel open, sir." Jake picked up the microphone again. This time he spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word was understood. "This is Captain Morrison. I saw your demonstration. Very impressive. Now let me show you something." He nodded to Lisa at the weapons station. She pressed the firing controls. 6 energy beams and 3 torpedoes shot out from the Defiance, aimed directly at the alien flagship. The weapons struck the Dominator's shields and exploded in bright flashes of light. When the explosions faded, the massive alien ship was completely undamaged. The human attack had been like throwing pebbles at a mountain, but that wasn't the point. "Did you see that?" Jake said into the microphone. "That was a human battle response. When you threaten us, we don't surrender. We fight back. It doesn't matter if we can win or not. It doesn't matter if we're outnumbered. We fight because that's what humans do." On the Vorthak flagship, chaos erupted on the bridge. Officers shouted reports and recommendations. Nobody could understand what had just happened. The humans had attacked despite seeing a demonstration of superior firepower. They had attacked knowing their weapons couldn't penetrate Vorthak's shields. They had attacked knowing it would mean their death. "Admiral," the tactical officer called out, "the human ship is accelerating again. They're making another attack run." Zextar watched in amazement as the tiny human vessel charged toward his fleet. Its weapons fired continuously now, sending streams of energy and explosives at the nearest. Vorthak ships. None of the attacks caused significant damage, but they kept coming anyway. "I don't understand this species," Vexilon said. "They fight without hope of victory. What do they hope to accomplish?" On the Defiance, the answer was becoming clear. The human ship wasn't trying to destroy the alien fleet. They were trying to prove a point. They were showing the aliens that humans would rather die fighting than live as slaves. "Captain," Pete Davis called out, "enemy ships are moving to surround us. They're trying to cut off our escape route." "Good," Jake replied. "Let them come closer. Lisa, concentrate fire on that cruiser to starboard. Tony, give me more speed." The ship shook as alien weapons fire began to strike their shields. Warning lights flashed on control panels throughout the bridge. The Defiance was taking damage, but it kept fighting. Amy Carter looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm receiving hundreds of messages from the alien fleet. They keep asking the same question. Why won't we surrender?" Jake smiled grimly. "Tell them to check their history books. Humans have been answering that question for thousands of years. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans faced an army of thousands. At the Alamo, 200 Texans fought an army of thousands. At Stalingrad, one city held out against an entire nation. We don't surrender because we can't. It's not in our nature." The battle continued to rage around them. The Defiance was massively outnumbered and outgunned, but it fought with a fury that none of the aliens had ever seen before. Every time the Vorthak expected the humans to give up, they attacked even harder, and for the first time in 300 years of conquest, Admiral Zextar began to feel something he had never felt before in battle: doubt. These humans were unlike any species his empire had ever encountered. They fought without hope of victory. They refused to be intimidated by superior force. They seemed to become more dangerous the more desperate their situation became. What kind of species chose death over surrender? What kind of warriors fought harder when the odds grew worse? And most importantly, what would happen when these humans warned their homeworld about the coming invasion? For the first time since the Empire began, Zexatar wondered if conquest might not be as easy as it had always been before. The Defiance dove through space like a wounded hawk that refused to fall. Alien weapons fire lit up the darkness around the ship as Captain Morrison pushed his crew and vessel beyond all normal limits. What the Vorthak were witnessing was something completely outside their experience. Humans at war. "Pete, "Take us through that asteroid field," Jake ordered, gripping his captain's chair as the ship shook from another enemy hit. "Sir, that's suicide," Navigator Pete Davis replied, his hands dancing over the controls. "The asteroids are too dense. We'll be crushed. The aliens won't follow us in there. Their ships are too big. Do it." Pete's training told him to refuse the order. Every regulation in the Space Service manual said what the captain was asking was impossible. But Pete had served with Jake Morrison for 3 years. He had learned that when his captain said something could be done, it usually could be. The Defiance plunged into the asteroid field at full speed. Rocks the size of buildings tumbled through space around them. Any one of them could smash the ship to pieces if they collided. But Pete's hands were steady on the controls. He had grown up piloting racing ships through the asteroid belts of Mars. This was just another race, except the finish line was survival. Behind them, the Vorthak fleet slowed to a stop at the edge of the asteroid field. Their massive ships couldn't navigate the narrow spaces between the floating rocks. For the first time since the battle began, the aliens couldn't shoot at the human vessel. "Brilliant," Admiral Zextar admitted grudgingly. "But they've only delayed the inevitable. They can't hide in there forever." Commander Vexilon nodded. "Should we send fighters in after them?" "No need. They'll run out of fuel and air eventually." "We'll wait." But Admiral Zextar had underestimated human creativity. Inside the asteroid field, Chief Engineer Tony Walsh was working on a plan that would have seemed insane to any alien species the Vorthak had ever fought. "Captain," Tony's voice came over the intercom, "I have an idea. These asteroids are full of iron ore. If we can magnetize our hull, we can stick to one of the bigger rocks. The aliens won't be able to detect us." "How long can we stay hidden?" Jake asked. "As long as we need to. The asteroid's mass will hide our energy signature. But that's not the best part. I can modify our torpedo guidance systems to use the asteroids as weapons." Jake smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since the battle began. "Explain." "We attach magnetic clamps to some of the smaller asteroids. Then we push them out of the field toward the alien ships. From their perspective, it will just look like natural asteroid drift. By the time they realize the rocks are aimed at them, it'll be too late to dodge." "Do it," Jake ordered. While Tony worked on his asteroid weapons, the rest of the crew prepared for the next phase of battle. Lisa Brown recalibrated the ship's energy cannons to work in short, concentrated bursts. In the asteroid field, they couldn't fire continuously without giving away their position. But they could hit hard and fast, then disappear again. Amy Carter monitored alien communications. The Vorthak were growing frustrated. They had been broadcasting surrender demands for an hour, but the humans weren't responding. Worse, they couldn't locate the human ship to force a surrender. "Captain," Amy reported, "the aliens are talking among themselves. They're confused. Apparently no species has ever used asteroids as cover before." "Why not?" Jake asked. "According to their communications, most species consider it too dangerous, too unpredictable. They prefer to fight in open space where they can use formation tactics." Jake nodded. That made sense from a military perspective. Traditional fleet battles were fought with disciplined formations and coordinated attacks. But humans had been fighting unconventional wars for thousands of years. They had learned that sometimes the best strategy was to throw out the rule book. "Tony, how are those asteroid weapons coming?" "Almost ready, Captain. I've got 5 rocks armed and targeted. Each one masses about 50,000 tons. Even with their shields, that's going to hurt." "Pete, plot us an escape route. As soon as we launch those asteroids, they're going to know where we are." "Already done, sir." I've mapped a path through the densest part of the field. It's risky, but we can make it. The Defiance waited in the shadow of a massive asteroid, invisible to alien sensors. Around them, the Vorthak fleet maintained its position, confident that time was on their side. They had food, fuel, and patience. Eventually, the humans would have to come out and surrender. They had no idea that 5 magnetized asteroids were already drifting toward their formation. The first asteroid struck the Vorthak cruiser-destroyer without warning. The ship's sensors detected the incoming rock only seconds before impact. There was no time to raise shields or change course. 50,000 tons of iron ore slammed into the alien vessel at tremendous speed. The destroyer's hull cracked like an egg. Atmosphere vented into space through a hole the size of a football field. Emergency lights flashed as the ship's crew struggled to contain the damage. Before the aliens could react to the first impact, the second asteroid struck another cruiser, then the third, then the fourth. In less than 3 minutes, 4 Vorthak ships had been severely damaged by weapons that weren't even weapons. They were just rocks guided by human ingenuity and determination. "Impossible!" Admiral Zextar shouted. "How are they doing this?" His tactical officer was frantically scanning the asteroid field. "I don't know, sir. The asteroids appear to be moving under their own power, but I can't detect any propulsion systems." The 5th asteroid missed its target as the Vorthak ship managed to dodge at the last second. But the psychological damage was already done. For the first time in 300 years, a Vorthak fleet had taken casualties in battle. Ships that had seemed invincible were floating dead in space. "There," the sensor operator called out. "I've detected the human ship. They're moving through the asteroid field at incredible speed." On the main screen, the Defiance appeared for just a moment before disappearing behind another rock. But that moment was enough. The ship was damaged but still fighting. Scorch marks covered its hull and one engine was dark, but it was still moving, still fighting. "All ships, pursue the human vessel," Zextar ordered. "I want that ship destroyed." But pursuing the Defiance through the asteroid field proved to be another lesson in human warfare tactics. The Vorthak ships were built for space battles, not navigation through obstacle courses. Their massive size, which had been an advantage in every previous battle, now worked against them. The human ship darted between asteroids like a fish swimming through coral. It appeared from behind one rock to fire at the aliens, then disappeared behind another before they could return fire. It used the asteroids as shields, as weapons, and as cover for surprise attacks. Pete Davis flew the ship like it was an extension of his own body. He had memorized the location of every major asteroid in the field. He knew which paths were too narrow for alien ships and which rocks were large enough to hide behind. The asteroid field had become his home territory, and he defended it like a master. Lisa Brown fired the ship's weapons with surgical precision. She couldn't waste ammunition on long-range shots that might miss. Every torpedo had to count. Every energy blast had to find its target. She was fighting the most important battle in human history with weapons that were barely adequate for the job, but what the weapons lacked in power, the crew made up for in tactics. They hit the aliens where they were weakest. They struck without warning and vanished before the enemy could respond. They turned every disadvantage into an advantage through pure human stubbornness. "Captain," Amy reported, "I'm monitoring alien communications. They're frustrated. They keep asking each other why we won't fight like a civilized species." Jake laughed, despite the situation. "Tell them we're not civilized. We're human. There's a difference." The battle in the asteroid field continued for 2 more hours. By the end, 3 more Vorthak ships had been damaged, and 1 had been destroyed completely. The human ship was battered and barely functional, but it was still fighting, and across the Vorthak fleet a new word was spreading through alien conversations. A word that had never been used to describe any enemy they had ever faced. Dangerous. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had not expected to be part of a space battle when she woke up that morning. As the Defiance's science officer, she usually spent her days analyzing mineral samples and studying cosmic radiation. But now, she found herself in the middle of the first interstellar war in human history, and her scientific mind was working on something much more important than rocks and stars. "Captain," she called from her station on the bridge, "I think I understand something about these aliens." Jake Morrison looked over at her. The battle had been raging for 4 hours now. His ship was badly damaged, and his crew was exhausted. They had fought with everything they had, but the alien fleet was still mostly intact. They needed an edge, something to turn the tide. "What have you found, Elena?" "I've been analyzing their communication patterns and tactical responses," she said, her fingers moving quickly over her scientific instruments. "These aliens have a fundamental weakness. Their entire military strategy is based on psychological intimidation, not actual combat." "Explain." Elena brought up a display showing alien fleet movements. "Look at their behavior. When we first refused to surrender, they were confused. When we attacked them, they were shocked. When we used unconventional tactics, they didn't know how to respond. They've conquered thousands of worlds, but they've never actually fought a real war." Lieutenant Amy Carter looked up from her communications station. "The doctor's right, Captain. I've been monitoring their messages. Half their conversations are them asking each other what to do. They keep saying things like, 'This has never happened before, and the tactical manuals don't cover this situation.'" Jake nodded slowly. It made sense. An empire built on fear and intimidation would have military tactics designed for easy victories against frightened enemies. But humans weren't frightened. Desperate, yes. Outnumbered, certainly, but not frightened. "Elena, what are you thinking?" The science officer turned to face her captain. "Psychological warfare, sir, but in reverse. Instead of them intimidating us, we intimidate them. Show them something they've never seen before. Something that will shake their confidence." "We're 1 damaged ship against 50, Jake pointed out. "What could we possibly show them that would intimidate them?" Elena smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Human history. Over the next hour, while the Defiance hid behind a large asteroid for repairs, Elena worked with Amy to create something that had never existed before. A propaganda broadcast designed to terrify aliens. They gathered recordings from Earth's historical archives. Videos, audio recordings, and images of humanity at war. Ancient battles where small forces held off massive armies. Medieval sieges where defenders fought to the last man. Modern wars where entire cities refused to surrender despite months of bombing. But most importantly, they found records of battles where humans had won against impossible odds through sheer determination and tactical innovation. "Amy, start broadcasting this on all frequencies," Elena ordered. "Make sure every alien ship receives it." The broadcast began with a simple message in the alien language. "You want to know what humans are? Let us show you." Then came the images. Greek soldiers holding the pass at Thermopylae against an army 100 times larger. Roman legions conquering most of the known world through discipline and tactics. Viking raiders sailing across unknown oceans to attack enemies who thought they were safe. Medieval knights charging into battle against overwhelming odds. Samurai warriors choosing death over dishonor. Native American warriors fighting for their homeland against technologically superior enemies. But the aliens were probably familiar with primitive warfare. The real shock came with modern human conflicts. World War I, where millions of humans fought and died in trenches that moved only a few miles in 4 years of constant battle. World War II, where entire cities were bombed to rubble, but their populations never surrendered. The footage showed human soldiers fighting in jungles, deserts, mountains, and cities. It showed partisan fighters sabotaging enemy equipment behind enemy lines. It showed civilians taking up weapons to defend their homes. It showed pilots flying their planes into enemy ships when they ran out of ammunition. We have fought 10,000 wars in our short history. Elena's voice accompanied the images. We have fought with sticks and stones. We have fought with swords and guns. We have fought with machines that can destroy cities, and in every single one of these wars, humans chose to fight rather than surrender, even when victory seemed impossible. On the Vorthak flagship, Admiral Zextar watched the human, broadcast with growing unease. The images were disturbing enough, but the implications were worse. These humans had been fighting constantly for their entire existence as a species. They had developed tactics and strategies through thousands of years of warfare. How many wars have they fought? Commander Vexilon asked quietly. According to our intelligence, they have never known true peace, the communications officer replied. Even now, when they have achieved spaceflight, they still have conflicts on their home world. The broadcast continued. It showed the development of human military technology, catapults that could throw stones through castle walls, cannons that could sink the largest ships, tanks that could cross any terrain, aircraft that could strike, targets anywhere on a planet. But the most disturbing part wasn't the weapons. It was the way humans used them. Unlike other species, humans didn't just build bigger weapons, they built smarter weapons. They developed tactics that turned their enemies' strengths into weaknesses. They found ways to win battles they should have lost. Look at this, Elena said in the broadcast, showing footage of guerrilla warfare. When humans are invaded by superior forces, we don't surrender. We disappear into the forests and mountains. We attack supply lines. We sabotage equipment. We make occupation so costly that the enemy eventually gives up and goes home. The images showed resistance fighters in dozens of human conflicts. Vietnamese fighters hiding in tunnels and emerging to attack enemy convoys. Afghan warriors using the mountains to defeat armies that had conquered other nations. Partisan groups operating behind enemy lines for years at a time. Admiral, the tactical officer said nervously, if these humans have this much experience with warfare, how do we conquer their planet? Admiral Zextar didn't answer. He was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. The Vorthak Empire had built its strategy around fighting peaceful species that valued survival over victory. Species that would rather surrender than see their worlds destroyed. But humans were different. The broadcast made that clear. They were a species that had turned warfare into an art form. They had spent thousands of years learning how to fight against superior enemies. They had developed tactics for every possible situation. This is their response to our ultimatum, Vexilon said. They're not trying to negotiate. They're trying to show us what we're up against. The final part of the broadcast was the most unsettling. Elena had compiled recordings of human military leaders throughout history, voices speaking in dozens of different languages, translated into the alien tongue. Give me liberty or give me death. We shall never surrender. Nuts. They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. Today is a good day to die. Death before dishonor. The voices spoke of concepts that were alien to the Vorthak mindset. Honor that was more important than survival. Freedom that was worth dying for. Pride that could not be broken by any amount of suffering. "We don't surrender because we can't," Elena said as the broadcast concluded. "It's not in our nature. You can destroy our ships, but more will come. You can conquer our worlds, but we'll never stop fighting to take them back. You can kill us, but you can't defeat us. Because to defeat humans, you would have to kill every single one of us. And even then, the last human alive would still be fighting." When the broadcast ended, the alien fleet was silent for several minutes. No communications, no movement, no response at all. Then, slowly, reports began to filter back to the Defiance. Alien ships were experiencing equipment failures. Crew members were requesting transfers. Some vessels were even dropping back to safer positions in the fleet formation. "Captain," Amy reported, "I'm detecting increased chatter on alien frequencies. They're discussing the broadcast. A lot of them are asking about tactical reassessments and requesting additional reinforcements." Jake looked at Elena with new respect. "Doctor, I think you just did something that hasn't happened in 300 years. "What's that, sir?" "You made the Vorthak Empire afraid." The Defiance was dying. Captain Jake Morrison could feel it in the way his ship shuddered with each movement. Half the lights on the bridge had failed. The air recycling system was working at 30% capacity. Chief Engineer Tony Walsh had reported 17 critical system failures in the last hour alone, but the ship was still fighting. "Hull breach on Deck 4, Amy Carter reported from her damage control station. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." "Life. Support holding at minimal levels," added Navigator Pete Davis. "But if we lose another power coupling, we'll be on emergency oxygen only." Jake nodded grimly. They had been fighting for 6 hours now. 6 hours against impossible odds. His crew of 47 had performed miracles, but miracles had their limits. The Vorthak fleet was still mostly intact, and his ship was falling apart around him. "Tony," Jake called over the intercom, "tell me you have something. Anything." The chief engineer's voice crackled back through the damaged communication system. "Captain, I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it. At this point, I'll take any idea you've got. Our reactor is damaged beyond repair. The containment field is failing. We've got maybe 30 minutes before it goes critical and takes us with it." Jake felt his stomach drop. A reactor explosion would vaporize the ship and everyone on it. "So what's your idea?" "We turn the reactor into a weapon. Instead of letting it explode randomly, we set it to detonate exactly where and when we want it to. Get close enough to their flagship and we can take out their command ship." The bridge fell silent. What Tony was suggesting was a suicide mission. They would have to fly directly at the most heavily defended ship in the alien fleet, survive long enough to get close, then sacrifice themselves to destroy the enemy command structure. "There's one problem," Lisa Brown said from the tactical station. "Their flagship has the strongest shields in the fleet. Our reactor explosion might not be enough to penetrate them." "Actually," Dr. Elena Rodriguez said quietly, "I think it would be. I've been analyzing their shield frequencies during the battle. Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and conventional explosives, but a reactor explosion creates a different type of energy signature. I think it would overload their defensive systems." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. They were exhausted, injured, and frightened. But not one of them had suggested surrender. Not one of them had asked to run away. They had all sworn an oath to defend human space, and they were prepared to die keeping that oath. "All right," Jake said finally, "but we do this smart. Elena, I want you to broadcast one final message to the alien fleet. Tell them what we're going to do? Sir? Elena looked confused. Why warn them? Because I want them to know that this is what humans do when we're cornered. I want them to remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Elena nodded and began preparing the broadcast. While she worked, Jake opened a ship-wide communication channel. All hands! This is the captain. I'm not going to lie to you. Our ship is dying, and there's no way to repair it. In a few minutes, we're going to make one final attack on the enemy flagship. It's a one-way mission. Anyone who wants to evacuate to the escape pods can do so now. No one will think less of you. He paused and looked around the bridge. Not one member of his crew moved toward the escape pods. All right then, Jake continued. We came out here to protect human space. We're going to finish the job. Tony, start the reactor overload sequence. Set it for a 15-minute countdown. That should give us enough time to reach the target. Reactor overload initiated. Tony's voice came back. 15 minutes and counting. Elena, send your message. The science officer activated the broadcast system one final time. Attention, Vorthak Fleet. This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the United Earthship Defiance. Our ship has been damaged beyond repair. In 14 minutes, our reactor will explode with the force of a small nuclear weapon. We are going to fly this ship directly into your flagship and take your admiral with us. She paused for a moment, then continued. We want you to understand what you're seeing. This is what humans do when we can't win. We make sure the enemy pays the highest possible price for their victory. Remember this moment. Remember what happened here. Because if you continue toward Earth, you're going to face millions more humans just like us. On the Vorthak flagship, Admiral Zextar listened to the human message with something approaching panic. In 300 years of conquest, no enemy had ever threatened him personally. No enemy had ever been willing to die just to kill him. Evasive maneuvers, he shouted. All ships, protect the flagship. But the Defiance was no longer following predictable patterns. Pete Davis had plotted a course that used the wreckage of previously damaged alien ships as cover. The human vessel darted between the hulks of destroyed cruisers, using them as shields against incoming fire. 12 minutes to detonation, Tony announced. The alien fleet concentrated all their fire on the approaching human ship. Energy beams and missile barrages filled the space around the Defiance. The ship's remaining shields flared and failed under the assault. Hull plates tore away and vented atmosphere into the vacuum. Hull integrity at 15%, Amy reported. We're losing structural cohesion. Just hold together a little longer, Jake whispered to his ship. Just a little longer. 10 minutes to detonation. The Defiance broke through the outer ring of alien ships. Half the vessel's hull was gone now, and whole sections were open to space. Most of the crew had evacuated to the few areas that still had atmosphere. But the bridge crew remained at their stations, guiding their dying ship toward its target. 8 minutes to detonation. More alien ships moved to intercept them, but Lisa Brown was still at her weapons station. Even with most of their armament destroyed, she managed to clear a path with their remaining torpedo tubes. Each shot was perfectly placed, striking enemy ships at their weakest points. 6 minutes to detonation. The flagship loomed ahead of them now, massive and threatening. Its weapons were firing continuously, trying to destroy the human ship before it could complete its suicide run. But the Defiance had survived this long by being unpredictable, and Pete Davis wasn't about to start flying in straight lines now. 4 minutes to detonation. Captain, Elena said, I'm detecting massive energy buildup in the alien flagship. They're preparing to fire their main weapon. Jake nodded. He had expected this. The aliens would try to vaporize his ship before it could reach them. Can we survive a hit from their primary beam? Not a chance, sir. That weapon could destroy a small moon. Then we'll have to make sure they don't get a clear shot. 2 minutes to detonation. The Vorthak flagship's main weapon charged to full power. It was the same weapon that had destroyed the asteroid earlier, the weapon that had been meant to intimidate the humans into surrendering. Now it was their last hope of stopping the approaching ship. But as the weapon powered up, something unexpected happened. The human vessel suddenly accelerated far beyond what should have been possible for a damaged ship. Tony Walsh had diverted all remaining power to the engines, including life support and gravity. The bridge crew was thrown against their restraints as the ship shot forward like a bullet. 30 seconds to detonation. The flagship fired its main weapon, but the human ship was moving too fast and too erratically. The beam missed by less than a kilometer, close enough to cook the remaining. Electronics on the Defiance's hull, but not enough to destroy the ship completely. 10 seconds to detonation. Jake Morrison looked around his bridge one last time. His crew was still at their stations, still doing their jobs, even though they all knew they had seconds to live. Amy was monitoring communications. Pete was holding their course steady. Lisa was preparing their final weapons. Elena was recording everything for the historical record. 5 seconds. It's been an honor serving with all of you, Jake said. 4. See you on the other side, Captain, Amy replied. 3. Give them hell, Tony's voice came over the intercom. 2. The Defiant struck the Vorthak flagship's shields at full speed. 1. The reactor exploded. The detonation was visible from 1,000 kilometers away. A ball of pure energy engulfed both ships, turning metal into plasma and plasma into light. When the explosion faded, the flagship was gone. The most powerful ship in the Vorthak fleet had been destroyed by a human vessel that massed less than 1% of its total weight. Admiral Zextar was dead. His command staff was dead. His invincible ship was space dust, and across the alien fleet, a new emotion spread through the surviving crews. It was something they had never felt before in their centuries of easy conquest. Terror. The humans had done something impossible. They had turned certain defeat into victory through sheer determination to take their enemies with them. They had proven that sometimes the will to fight was more powerful than any weapon. In the wreckage of their flagship, the Vorthak Empire began to understand what they had awakened. Humanity was not like other species. Humans did not surrender. They did not give up. They did not accept defeat. And somewhere in the depths of space, emergency beacons were broadcasting the final message from the Defiance, a message that would change the course of galactic history. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 300 years, the Vorthak Empire had suffered a military defeat. Admiral Zextar was dead. The flagship Dominator was destroyed, and it had been done by a single human. Ship that chose destruction over surrender. On Kellax Prime, a world that had been conquered 40 years earlier, factory worker Moltar heard the whispered news from a friend. The humans fought back, his friend said quietly. One of their ships destroyed the Admiral's flagship. They actually won. Moltar felt something stir in his chest that he had almost forgotten. Hope. For 4 decades, his people had lived under Vorthak rule. They worked in alien factories, mining precious metals for the Empire. Their children learned Vorthak history and were forbidden to speak their native language. Resistance had seemed impossible. But if humans could fight the Empire and win, maybe other species could too. Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of worlds throughout Vorthak space. Species that had surrendered without fighting were learning that the Empire could be beaten. The myth of Vorthak invincibility was cracking, and through those cracks, rebellion was growing. On the industrial world of Zentros, mine supervisor Kexlin called together her work crew in secret. "The humans showed us something," she told them. "They showed us that the Vorthak can be defeated. But more than that, they showed us what it means to fight for freedom." The recordings from the Defiance had spread throughout the underground networks that connected resistance groups across the galaxy. Every species that had been conquered was watching the footage of one small human ship taking on an entire fleet. They saw Captain Morrison's crew choosing death over surrender. They heard Dr. Rodriguez's broadcasts about human military history, and they began to understand that freedom was worth fighting for. Meanwhile, Earth was preparing for war. Admiral Kate Hudson stood in the command center of Luna Base, humanity's primary military installation. The emergency beacon from the Defiance had reached Earth 3 days after the battle. Captain Morrison's final message had been brief, but clear. The Vorthak Empire was coming, but they could be beaten. "How long until their main fleet reaches Earth?" Admiral Hudson asked her intelligence officer. 6 weeks, ma'am. Maybe less if they decide to rush the attack after losing their admiral." Hudson nodded. 6 weeks to prepare for the greatest battle in human history. 6 weeks to turn Earth's defense forces into something that could stand against an empire that had conquered thousands of worlds. But humans had advantages that other species lacked. They had been fighting wars for their entire history. They understood tactics, strategy, and the psychology of warfare. Most importantly, they had learned from the Defiance's battle. "Have our engineers finished analyzing the alien technology from the wreckage?" Hudson asked. "Yes, ma'am. We've recovered enough debris to understand their shield frequencies and weapon systems. We're already adapting our own technology to counter theirs." The battle with the Defiance had taught humanity valuable lessons about their enemy. The Vorthak were technologically superior, but they relied too heavily on overwhelming force and intimidation. They weren't prepared for enemies who fought back intelligently. Human shipyards were working around the clock to build new vessels. But these weren't copies of existing designs. Human engineers were creating ships specifically designed to fight the Vorthak. Fast, maneuverable vessels that could use asteroids and debris as cover. Ships with weapons designed to penetrate alien shields. Vessels that could fight and win even when outnumbered. On the planet Threxus, former General Vexcol received new orders from the Vorthak High Command. He was to take the Third Fleet and crush the growing rebellions that were sprouting up across the Empire. Intelligence reports indicated that 47 systems were now in open revolt. "How did this happen so quickly?" Vexcol asked his staff officers. "It's the humans, sir," his intelligence chief replied. "Their battle footage is being broadcast on every rebel network in the Empire. Species that have been peaceful for decades are suddenly taking up arms." Vexcol studied the reports. The rebellions weren't random uprisings. They were coordinated attacks on key Vorthak installations. Supply depots were being destroyed. Communication arrays were being sabotaged. Transport ships were disappearing without a trace. The rebels were using human tactics. The humans are teaching them how to fight, Vexcol realized. They're sharing their military knowledge with every species in the Empire. It was true. Earth's military leaders had made a decision that would have seemed impossible to any other species. They were giving away their tactical advantages. Human military advisors were secretly contacting rebel groups throughout Vorthak space. They were teaching alien species how to fight guerrilla wars, how to strike at enemy weaknesses, how to turn their oppressors' strength against them. Why would they do that? Vexcol's tactical officer asked. Why give their enemies the same advantages they have? The answer was something that the Vorthak couldn't understand. Humans believed that freedom was a universal right. They believed that any species willing to fight for their liberty deserved help, even if those species might become competitors or enemies in the future. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Kim was leading the effort to contact rebel groups. She sat in a secure bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, coordinating with resistance fighters across the galaxy. Kellex Prime is requesting information about improvised explosives, her communications officer reported. Zentros wants tactical advice for attacking supply convoys. The Helios system is asking for help with encrypted communications. Give them everything they need, Dr. Kim ordered. Send them our complete tactical databases, every piece of military knowledge we have. Her staff looked shocked. Ma'am, that information took us centuries to develop. If we give it away, then the galaxy will be a more dangerous place for tyrants, Dr. Kim finished. That's exactly what we want. The rebellion spread faster than the Vorthak could respond. On Kellex Prime, Moltar led a team of saboteurs who destroyed the main fusion reactor that powered the planet's orbital defense platform. On Zentros, Kexlin organized a strike that shut down the largest mining operation in the sector. On dozens of other worlds, similar attacks were crippling the Empire's ability to function. But the most important change wasn't tactical. It was psychological. For 300 years, the Vorthak Empire had ruled through fear. Their subjects had believed that resistance was impossible, that the Empire was too powerful to fight. The humans had proven that belief wrong. One ship, crewed by 47 people, had destroyed the Empire's most powerful vessel. If humans could do that, then anyone could fight back. Commander Vexilon, who had survived the destruction of the flagship, found himself in command of what remained of the Vorthak fleet in human space. He had 49 ships left, still a formidable force. But morale was collapsing. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving requests for transfer from 17 ships. The crews want to return to Vorthak space immediately. Denied, Vexilon replied. We have our orders. We will proceed to Earth and complete the conquest. But privately he wondered if conquest was still possible. The humans had changed the rules of warfare. They had shown the galaxy that the Vorthak could be beaten. More importantly, they had shown every oppressed species that freedom was worth dying for. The empire that had seemed eternal was beginning to crumble. Not from external attack, but from internal rebellion. Species that had been slaves for generations were remembering what it meant to be free. And at the center of it all was a simple message that Captain Jake Morrison had sent with his dying ship. Be advised, they are not invincible. Humanity can win this war. That message was being broadcast on rebel frequencies throughout the galaxy. It was being whispered in slave quarters and factory dormitories. It was being carved into walls and printed on secret pamphlets. 3 words that were destroying an empire. They are not invincible. The Vorthak had built their power on the belief that resistance was futile. The humans had proven that belief was a lie. And once that lie was exposed, the Empire's foundation began to crack. Revolution was spreading across the stars, and it all started with one human ship that refused to surrender. 6 months after the destruction of the Dominator, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance II. The new ship bore the same name as the vessel that had started a galactic revolution, but it was larger, more powerful, and equipped with technology adapted from captured Vorthak designs. Captain, Lieutenant Sam Murphy, his new first officer, called from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission from Kellex Prime. They're requesting immediate assistance with their liberation. Jake looked at the star chart displayed on the main screen. Kellex Prime was one of 43 worlds that had declared independence from the Vorthak Empire in the past 6 months. The planet's rebellion had been successful, but Vorthak forces were massing for a counterattack. Set course for Kellex Prime, Jake ordered. Maximum speed. The Defiance II was not alone. Around it flew a fleet of 20 human ships, each one crewed by volunteers who had heard the story of the original Defiance. They called themselves the Liberation Fleet, and their mission was simple: help any world that wanted to throw off Vorthak rule. As they traveled through hyperspace, Jake reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. The Vorthak Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just months ago, was collapsing from within. Rebellion had spread to over 200 worlds. The Empire's military was stretched thin, trying to maintain control over species that no longer feared them. Captain, Dr. Patricia Wells, the ship's science officer, reported from her station. I'm analyzing the latest intelligence reports from Earth Command. The Vorthak have lost control of 3 entire sectors. Their military forces are requesting reinforcements from the home worlds. Jake nodded. The Empire was dying, but it was still dangerous. Desperate enemies often fought harder than confident ones. The Vorthak were learning that lesson the hard way as they faced species that had been peaceful for generations, but were now fighting with the fury of the newly freed. Any word from the Zentro system? Jake asked. The rebellion there was successful, Sam replied. The Vorthak garrison surrendered after a 3-day siege. The local population is requesting technical assistance to restore their infrastructure. It was a pattern that had repeated itself across the galaxy. Worlds that had been conquered decades or centuries ago were rediscovering their capacity for resistance. The spark had been lit by one human ship refusing to surrender, but it had grown into a fire that was consuming the Empire. The Defiance II dropped out of hyperspace near Kellex Prime. The planet hung in space like a blue-green jewel, but it was surrounded by the dark shapes of Vorthak warships. The Empire had sent a fleet to retake the world, but they had arrived to find it defended by more than just local forces. Multiple contacts on sensors, the tactical officer reported. I count ships from 7 different species, all in defensive formation around the planet. Jake smiled. This was something new in galactic history. Species that had been enemies or strangers were now fighting side by side against their common oppressor. The Calaxians were defending their world alongside former Vorthak subjects from 6 other systems. Open a channel to the planetary. Defense force, Jake ordered. The main screen flickered to show a Calaxian commander. His species was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. But his expression was familiar to any human who had ever fought for freedom. Determined, defiant, and ready for battle. This is General Moltar of the Kellex Defense Force, the alien said. Captain Morrison, your reputation precedes you. We are honored by your assistance. General, Jake replied, humanity is honored to fight alongside free beings everywhere. What's the situation? The Vorthak have 15 ships in orbit. They're demanding our surrender and threatening to bombard our cities if we refuse. So far, we've refused. Jake studied the tactical display. 15 Vorthak ships against a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels. 6 months ago, those odds would have meant certain defeat for anyone opposing the Empire. But the galaxy had learned new ways of fighting. General, are your people prepared for a coordinated attack? More than prepared, Captain. We've been studying human tactical manuals for months. We know how you defeated the Dominator. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the previous 3 centuries of galactic history. Instead of the Vorthak facing frightened species begging for mercy, they found themselves fighting opponents who used every dirty trick in the human playbook. Calaxian fighters used their knowledge of local space to lay ambushes in asteroid fields. Ships from the Zentros system employed hit-and-run tactics that had been perfected by human pirates. A squadron of vessels from the Helix Nebula used their ship's natural camouflage to approach the enemy fleet unseen. But most importantly, they all fought with the same principle that had guided the original Defiance. Never surrender, never give up, never accept defeat. The Vorthak fleet, commanded by officers who had never faced real resistance, found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. Within 3 hours, 8 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled. The remainder retreated toward the edge of the system. "Let them go," Jake ordered when his tactical officer suggested pursuit. "Let them report back to their commanders. Let them spread the word that the Empire can't hold territory anymore." As the human fleet orbited Kellax Prime, Jake received reports from across the galaxy. The liberation movement was accelerating. Worlds that had been under Vorthak control for centuries were declaring independence. Species that had never known freedom were learning what it meant to fight for their rights. On Earth, Admiral Kate Hudson was coordinating the largest military operation in human history. Not a conquest, but a liberation. Human fleets were spreading across the galaxy, not to build an empire of their own, but to help other species build their own futures. "It's remarkable," Dr. Wells observed as she analyzed the reports. "In 6 months, we've gone from being unknown to the galactic community to leading a revolution that spans hundreds of star systems." "We're not leading it," Jake corrected. "We just showed them it was possible. Every species in this galaxy has the right to be free. We just reminded them that freedom is worth fighting for." 3 months later, Jake stood in the ruins of a Vorthak command center on the planet Threxus. The Empire's regional headquarters had fallen after a week-long siege led by local rebels with human tactical support. Vorthak banners lay trampled in the dust, replaced by the flags of a dozen newly independent worlds. Lieutenant Sam Murphy approached with a communication tablet. "Captain, we're receiving reports from the Vorthak home system. There's been a coup. The High Command has been overthrown by their own military. They're requesting peace negotiations." Jake looked up at the alien sky, where ships from 20 different species flew in formation. Each one represented a world that had chosen freedom over slavery, hope over fear. The Vorthak Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries, was finished. "What happens now, sir?" Sam asked. "Do we go home?" Jake considered the question. Earth was safe. The immediate threat was over. Humanity could return to its own space and focus on its own development. That would be the smart thing to do. But Jake Morrison had not become a hero of galactic liberation by doing the smart thing. "No," he said finally, "our work isn't finished. There are still species out there who don't know they can be free. There are still tyrants who think they can rule through fear. As long as there are beings in this galaxy who need help fighting for their freedom, humanity will be there." He looked at his first officer, a young man who had volunteered for the Liberation Fleet after hearing the story of the original Defiance crew. "Sam, what did you learn from all this?" Sam thought for a moment. That it doesn't matter how big the enemy is or how impossible the odds seem. What matters is being willing to fight for what's right. "Close," Jake said, "but not quite. What I learned is that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a gun or a ship or a bomb. It's the idea that every thinking being has the right to be free. Once that idea spreads, no empire can stand against it." Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Vorthak Empire, they would mark the beginning of the end as the moment when one human ship refused to surrender. They would call it the Battle of Saul's Edge, or Morrison's Last Stand, or the spark that lit the galaxy. But the crew of the original Defiance would have had a simpler name for it. They would have called it Tuesday, because for humans, fighting impossible odds in defense of freedom wasn't heroic or remarkable. It was just what they did. The galaxy was a very different place now. Instead of one massive empire ruling through fear, there were hundreds of independent worlds cooperating through choice. Trade flowed freely between systems. Ideas and cultures mixed and grew. Art and science flourished under conditions of liberty. And at the center of it all was a simple principle that had started with one human captain's refusal to kneel before tyrants: that freedom was worth any price, and that no force in the universe could defeat a people determined to be free. The stars were still cold and distant, but the space between them was filled with something new: hope, and the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, human ships were still flying, still fighting, still carrying the message that had changed everything. We don't surrender. We don't give up. We adapt. We overcome. And we never stop fighting for what's right. That was the human way. And now, it was.